have some designers and developers and our therapist, Steve Hickey, who's going to take us through some common problems that design and dev teams have. And we're going to talk it out and end in some hugs and cries.
We'll see. Great. Hey everybody, I'm Steve Hickey. I'm a user experience designer. I will try not to let that bias me towards any particular group here. We can certainly start off with the first shared problem we all have, which is that snow outside that is just looking horrible to me right now. I'm really disappointed in that. But to get past the snow and into actually the relevant stuff, I think the first and most obvious point of contention I see among most designers and developers revolves around communication. I mean, whether or not the person's sitting across the desk from you, or they're sitting on the other side of the building, or they're on the other side of the world, the same set of problems seems to crop up from time to time. So what I want to know is how you guys deal with communicating with your counterparts and what problems have happened, how you've solved them. Anybody want to get us started? Sam, why don't you go
Yeah,
first?
sure. I mean, really pulling together the teams early on, you can't make up for that. Usually backing in as a UX architect to something that's already been started is a death knell. I know I'm already going to have problems. So making sure the project actually ships out correctly and getting ahead of that is really important. Making sure that devs are in the room, that we're not kind of dreaming things up.
I'll have to give Sam credit. He does do a good job about this. His first project at Constant Contact, he was the first UX person who proactively invited developers to the very early stage discussions. You have to balance that though, because you can't have 5 of us sitting in a room because, as you know, we're just going to nitpick like crazy. So that's good. But another facet of communication is just how you get your assets and what exactly you're looking for. At Constant Contact, up until this week, you guys were in a completely different system.
That's right.
And so we had no idea what they're doing. They don't know what we're doing. We work on Jira tickets. They work in Basecamp or whatever you were using. I don't know.
That's right.
They attach tons of image files, like tons and tons and tons of image files. And I'm like, where are you describing the functionality I need to build? Because all you're posting is images.
Right.
Yeah.
Maggie, do you attach too many image files to things?
Probably. I don't know. That's a question for Jeremy, I think. I would echo the importance of connecting people early on, and we've definitely done a better job doing that most recently, but on all projects. I think before it becomes really important to talk to each other, I think there's a layer of mutual understanding and trust that needs to be established. And so knowing what the roles are and what the shared goals are, what's important and what the people are doing. I mean, to me, I look across at what Jeremy does at his desk every day, and it looks like typity. There's that like black screen, and there's a website actually that simulates that. It was a Hacker Type.
Yeah,
So,
I'm glad you're not looking at my screen.
well, but it's like you just basically hit your fingers on the keys and that's it. And you may not be able to tell because I'm not covered in sticky notes, but I am a designer. And so often, the issues emerge for me when it's, being asked to deliver something without being given the appropriate resources or time or, something along those lines. So.
Yeah, so I like images. Images speak 1,000 words. Just like you look at a photograph and it tells a story. But at the same time, we kind of need some context. And I think a little bit of text can go a long way next to an image. And what I've been doing recently is when we're using Jira on a project right now. I'm not the biggest fan of Jira. We use Trello a lot to attach an image along with the user story. So you kind of tell the user story, and also any images that make sense. I take screenshots out of the prototypes or comps that we have, just to give that extra context with the story. And be able to remember, it helps me remember later on when I'm looking at it weeks later after I wrote the story. It helps me remember what it was about. And we can kind of see, it makes it easier to communicate with other people as well.
So what about when you're not getting what you need? Is it everybody sitting in the room going, oh, this damn designer's over there on the other side of the building. What are they up to? Or you walk over? And
Yeah, for us it's like, hey, Maggie, you're right over there. What's going on here? I think for the most part, it's pretty collaborative, mostly from day one. There's a lot of time up front that Maggie or our other designer, Tim, will spend with the clients kind of doing a product definition, understanding the problem they're solving, who the users are, all that kind of work. The developers aren't involved too heavily at that point. But gradually we start to see more and more and kind of do feasibility check-ins, and did one the other day, just making sure that, is there anything here that's going to be a problem or risky, or that we should maybe think about a different way to work around. But yeah,
I mean, on the most basic level, and I say this kind of a lot, but in order to be successful, product has to be feasible, it has to be usable, and it has to be valuable. So really, it's the problem spaces that within which we operate have these three dimensions. And obviously, with the different expertise, we advocate for those different dimensions. And then there's that business dimension that's critically important, which is kind of the business objectives and what are the drivers for this project to begin with. And I think a lot of the tension actually can be resolved at that level too. A lot of the swirling around in a bowl kind of aimlessly, or changing scope or changing priorities happen kind of because that business driver, whatever that may be, is not defined well enough, and then we kind of feel the pain of that. The other kind of thing that stems from that interaction is that at every point we're being asked to advocate for those different dimensions, but it's understanding kind of how the three overlap that give us like a shared trajectory or like shared endpoint toward which we should strive. So there are always compromises that need to be made at every level, on the development side, on the design side, scope has to change, those types of things. But knowing the context for that bigger goal and what we're driving towards typically helps us make the right compromises, as opposed to just cutting scope because, or this is too difficult to implement. It's going to take too much time.
Sam and Adam, you have a very different office than Maggie and Jeremy, right? Over at Constant Contact, are you guys spread out from each other?
Yeah, so when I first came to Constant Contact, I decided to embed myself with the email team. So that was my first big project. And I decided, well, I could be over here, doing my UX thing and architecting from 600 feet from the other department, or just place myself in the middle of it. I have a background as an engineer and a developer. Yeah, unfortunately. Oh yeah, it's horrible.
Do you think that made it easier to get along with the engineers?
I
Get along.
Yeah. I guess this is therapy.
Did that prepare you for the nerfing attacks you would receive every day?
Yeah, there was some violence in the beginning, but things stemmed off.
Now you throw them.
Now I do throw them.
about?
So yes, in the beginning there was a fair bit of skepticism.
You mean I didn't think you actually were doing work?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So
I thought he was staring at his screen all day. I'd walk by his desk, and he'd have the same
That's what
the
we
same thing up on the screen. Maybe you were doing that exercise they were talking about with art.
it's
Where
cognitive.
you look at it,
It's a cognitive. Thank you.
and like hours would go by, I'd come back, and he's like,
Oh boy.
and so I knew he was a contractor, and I was convinced he was just milking us for the money.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
But we go out on full time.
yeah,
So.
when Maggie sees me typing, my keyboard's not even plugged in.
Was it weird having this UX guy come up in your space? Was that a problem for you guys, or?
Actually, I think it was pretty good. We've had a problem in the past where UX was an island, and they have their own space now, and Sam's moved back in there. I don't know if that's because we kicked you out or not, but they reviewed sort of as an island, and yeah, sure, it was one of those things you just throw stuff over the wall and somebody would get it, and it wasn't so much a back and forth conversation. So it was good. Like our QE staff, our quality engineers are embedded with the teams, and that's because they're part of the team and they're part of all of the discussions, and I don't think they could do a good job of really testing what we were building if they weren't that heavily involved, and I think it goes the same for UX, but then again, you guys need your fancy lights and your couches and those spaces that we don't have.
I think it's safe to say that the era of throwing stuff over the wall is over. And so, collaborating really early on is important. I mentioned that people advocate for different areas of their expertise, and that's true. But the other thing that I believe is that designers don't have a monopoly on ideas, and often in the early phases when we're still kind of generating them and thinking through, the product that we're going to build, bringing an interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary team together, getting everybody involved, has been been a big factor to the successes that we've had.
Right, you guys are all playing too nice. Let's try something new. So, this one's for the developers. So, one of the problems we have as designers, I know, is that if we're working on Photoshop, it's really easy to have, you've got the same design module across an entire site, and yet one module's got 20 pixels of padding, and another one's got 30 pixels of padding, and this one's got 18. What do you do when you get those sort of documents from people? You're sitting there staring at all this stuff that you know is off. How do you handle it?
I swear. They changed it a little again. Why can't they keep anything the same ever? But it's, I've been told that it's an art, it's ever evolving. This one's a little bit better than the last one. The real challenge comes in keeping them uniform once you've decided something's better. We rarely get the time to go back and update things. And so we have a lot of patches on top of existing software to make it behave a little bit differently. And that's frustrating.
Yeah, and I don't know if I can remember a case where that was really a big problem for me. I think Maggie's fond of saying decide in the browser. So the Photoshop stuff can happen, or Sketch, or whatever tools you like to use. You hand that off, and the developers can look at it and maybe make some suggestions, or maybe not, and then you can iterate a little bit before you actually start getting into CSS or laying things out in iOS or whatever. But then once you get into the kind of finished product where you actually have development resources allocated to this project, and you're doing real work. Not that design isn't real work, but you're creating.
To that.
Oh, I'm stirring up the controversy. Once you get into the browser or on a device, and you actually can play around with it and touch things and move things around and see how it feels, that's when you start to really make your decisions. The padding and the margins and the font sizes, that's all small stuff.
Yeah, I guess it's one thing that is problematic often in the design process is this idea of deliverables and polishing them to this nth degree when it's actually irrelevant. And there's this philosophy that I kind of subscribe to, which is like getting out of the deliverables business and trying to think about, just critically about, what is that shared goal that we're trying to achieve? And basically design is, to me, about communication. So I need to make some decisions, and then I need to figure out what the most effective way to communicate those decisions to Jeremy, what the most ways are, right? I'm trying to get my tenses together. So, whether it's the Photoshop file, or whether it's some kind of interactive prototype that will, communicate more than just the placement, but the interaction, and that's what it boils down to. And then different project calls for different artifacts, and you can't approach everything. There's not like a cookie cutter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, profits, whatever.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I mean, you're always attacking it from, you fall in love with the problem, not the solution. And in order to do that, you have to have a lot of options. So sometimes you have to make all those Axure prototypes or whatever you're building in. The mobile prototype, the just user flows. There's a million ways to get there. And just to let you guys know, for Constant Contact, I stop at UX. So we have some wonderful people doing the visual pieces, so I can't really take credit for that.
What happens when you let go of that? When it moves beyond you, do you stay up to date with something?
Yeah. I like to sit on the egg till it's hatched. I tend to like to support it all the way through, because I think my blueprints, by the time they make it to the end, could change quite considerably, and I want to make sure that I'm building for the goals, right? Whether they be user goals or whether they be business goals. So I want to make sure that's maintained throughout the entire project. So I will spend some time with the visual guys, but usually I'm more on the dev side in the beginning, making sure that goes right.
And you show up at our desks at the end.
Yes.
Yeah.
This
isn't what I designed.
Yeah.
Just at the end, or does he buzz around the entire time?
Yeah.
I'm a buzzer.
A constant
I'm a buzzer.
dull buzzing noise.
Buzzer.
And I'm
Yeah.
also a face-to-face guy.
Yeah.
There's a need for email. I get that.
There better be.
There better be.
It's email marketing.
It's email, man. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. I interrupt everyone the most. I really want to make sure that it's not that I want them to see my point of view, because I'm a facilitator. Again, I want to own the problem, so I want to understand what's wrong with my take on this. And usually, developers are great for that. They're very logical, very black and white, and they can see things that sometimes I can't extrapolate from another designer or a visual guy.
No, I just want to be told that I'm right, get a paycheck, go home.
So if you want to be right, I mean, imagine every once in a while you're going to see something that isn't done the way you wanted it done. What happens to the devs when you walk over and say, I just want it that way? And it doesn't make sense to them, but it makes sense to you.
Yeah, so I think what helps a lot, and we talked a lot and we heard a lot about context. And I think, we have to pick our battles, and I try to pick my battles anyway. So one, if I'm actually down to the point where I have to articulate a change that needs to happen, we talked about padding, 20 pixels here, 20 pixels there, 10, 5, whatever. It has to be packed in the context. Why does it matter? And often it helps to frame that, with the reason why the decision was made to begin with. And if we lack that context, obviously we don't necessarily know where to focus our attention in the execution. That context is something that we try to pepper in throughout all of our conversations and in meetings, and framing the conversation and trying to focus on what those end goals are. If you have that, then it doesn't really pain you to make an adjustment because you understand why. Now, if I were just showing up and saying, sorry, that 5 this way and that 2 this way, and I'm sorry, is that 1 pixel hairline at 50% opacity or 20%? You're missing the point in that way, I think.
So you're not playing the hovering art director card in any way?
No, mostly because I don't like to stand.
Is she playing hovering art director, Jeremy?
No, actually, so I think Maggie does a great job of understanding the problem and basically crafting a solution to that problem and understanding and being able to explain why every decision was made. At some point, I think she's bullshitting me because she actually has an answer for literally everything. I'm like, why is this over here? Why is it this big and that's that big? And she can explain every single detail to me.
That is the most important skill a designer can have.
Yeah, just tell me something that sounds good and I'll walk away and leave you alone. But I think she really does understand the implications of every decision and the cost and the benefit of every decision. And that's been really impressive to me. And I think the trick for me is really not asking too many questions and just kind of taking for granted that I've learned to trust her, and that didn't really take very long. But basically saying, well, it's the way it is in the prototype for a reason, and unless I get to the point of implementation and something is really painful for me, there's some real friction in actually making it come to life, then I'll go back and say how strong is the reason for it to be the way it is, and can we compromise? And that happens occasionally.
I feel like I need to qualify that just a little bit. Often, and this is, I think, true on most projects, there are assumptions that we're making about the users and about the outcomes, and basically the design is our best bet. And in some way, we constantly talk about, ship it, because often the real learning comes after, and this idea of iterating on it. So it's not like, oh, here I've crafted this thing and it's perfect. Quite the opposite. Often there are lots of different decisions that are based on assumptions that we couldn't validate or we can't validate until it goes out. So in a way, splitting hairs about some of those things, early is fruitless because you're still going to land possibly on the wrong decision, just a different wrong decision. So.
What about when the devs just say no?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to have had that happen, right?
How do you feel when I tell you no, you can't have grouping?
I say, fine, I'll talk to you in a couple days.
Okay.
And I'll just bring it up again.
I'll be back with friends.
Yeah, I'll be back with friends. It's exactly what I do.
Roving gangs of designers.
Bring your
all
boss, I'll bring my architect.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
That's a real challenge because we start out with this kind of blue sky, oh, everybody's excited, we want to do this, and then the constraints really start to trickle down, and then we realize, okay, we have X amount of time, and this is where we are in the project, and this is just out of scope, and or this particular implementation of it is not going to fly. So that's pretty tough.
Yeah, I mean, at Constant Contact, we almost set up the contention because dev is at the, well, QE technically is at the very end, but dev's close to the end, and if we're waiting and waiting and waiting for final, and we've learned that nothing is ever, ever, ever final, we joke that we don't want to see it until it's final, 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 because we hear it's final,
I like
and then
you, I don't like you.
and then you know, your boss sees it and it's not final anymore, and then their boss sees it and it's not final anymore. But there's a contention because we have deadlines a lot of the time. We say we're agile, but let's be honest, we do have deadlines because
Agile with a lowercase a.
yeah. And so when we start backing up against those things, dev's going like, get it done. I need to start building. And minor changes, pixels here and there, whatever, we can get started with that. But when someone decides to reimagine an entire product as it's in beta testing, that can be frustrating. Could be, maybe, might have happened.
We actually have a prop for this scenario in our office. It's called the King Buzzkill crown. And when the designers get really excited about something and then one of the developers, Tim, says, you know, we really can't do it that way, but we could do it this way. Tim then earns the King Buzzkill crown for the day, and he has to wear it.
Who has it right now?
It has relatively permanent residence on my desk. That's only because I bought it, that's right. Right, Tim?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, do you guys feel like one party has more power in this relationship?
At different stages. I think there's a lot of power in UX in the beginning. Yeah, we're the dreamers of the dream. We're the guys that kind of, you know, move around the office and have all the cool furniture and talk to the clients early on or the users early on, and we're connected to research. So we definitely strut our stuff in the beginning, but I think the dynamic changes if we have a sprint 0 in which the think it phase is going on. But during the build it phase, I think, you know, if we did everything, if we had our due diligence and all the user stories were thought out and everything's perfect, then fine, it moves through dev. But if we hadn't done our jobs, then I think the power shifts to dev to tell us, hey guys, you didn't think this little piece out, and that piece is going to cause a big ripple. And then dev has a chance to kind of swagger a little.
I would agree.
Yeah.
We're the gatekeepers. I mean, you actually can't get anything out into production unless we code it.
No.
But then again, you don't want anything we design going to production either. So.
Actually, there have been situations, you mentioned something you designed going into production. Some of the moments that I've been most kind of satisfied from the various collaborations that I had within Terrible Labs, it has been instances where the developers had to fill in some blank, something that I either dropped the ball on or something that we just didn't have enough time to really consider. And they actually delivered, you know, UI solutions or, you know, visual elements that were above and beyond anything that was within my scope. And when I saw that, I mean, you know, this is a therapy session, so, and we don't have Kleenex. You know, I was genuinely touched by this because it made the product better, and I hadn't even, you know, thought through. I'm thinking about that preview. You know, we had a sort of crowdfunding product, and you can imagine having kind of like those, you know, tiles that kind of show you what the different things you can, you know, invest in or whatever are. And the clients on the back end would have to input all this information, and they devised a way for them to have that tile on the right-hand side, like sort of auto-populate as they were filling in the content, so that you know, they could have a sense of, oh, this content's getting long, and not just like a hard stop, oh, you have 30 characters and that's it. They could get the visual. You know, and that was, again, completely out of scope of my work. But that really established trust. And I think trust and that kind of collaboration is what, you know, if you talk about power and like so-and-so has more power here and so-and-so has more power here, I feel like that breeds kind of pointing fingers, because they could have easily gotten to that point and said, oh, she hadn't delivered, you know, comms for this, I don't know what to do here, and just let it go, right, and do nothing, but they didn't. So there's kind of the reciprocal that happens. I try to.
We have the power to do it.
You have the power to do
But
it.
yeah, it's not so much a power thing. I think that it's more, there's different, we have different strengths, and there's different points in the project's life cycle that your strengths are more, you have more leverage from those strengths. So earlier on, the designers have more leverage. Later on, the developers have more leverage. It's kind of a natural part of the life cycle.
Is Jeremy a good designer?
I think so. I think so. I've seen some good stuff.
Want to let him take a crack at the logo?
What's that?
Want to let him take a crack at the logo sometime?
Oh yeah, well, maybe.
I invented the logo.
There we
I
go.
didn't draw it.
Jeremy invented dinosaurs.
You're pretty old.
Now hold on. You might be a compulsive liar. I think we've uncovered something here. Adam, are you a good designer?
No,
What do you
not
think,
at
Sam?
No.
No.
It's just, yeah, we're going to stay away
Jeez.
from that.
Yep.
Yeah,
Nope.
So.
Nope. But I didn't know you were an engineer. So.
Yeah, look at that.
Yeah.
Now I'll swagger during the build phase.
There you go.
Yeah.
You're welcome to come on over. Next time we run up against a deadline, you can.
No.
I'll give you access. You can commit.
No, I'm a failed programmer. Happily.
Oh, so is that what designers do? The failed programmers?
They could be. They could be.
So, designers, how do you go about understanding the technical limitations of a really ambitious project? I mean, we've got crazy ideas.
Right.
Sometimes that's why you hear no.
I
And it
think
sounds like
the-
the communication here is good.
Yeah, I
but-
think the only answer to that is, unfortunately, going to Adam is my way to get my answers. As I'm building out, as I'm blue skying things, begrudgingly, I have to, have a moment to myself. Say, okay, I got to talk to Adam, and we sit down, and having that insight. I'll never have that insight. I mean, he's been there for 4 years. He has a historical perspective on the code base, and not only the code base he works on, but there's many code bases and there's many products in the company. He's my go-to guy, and oh, stop it. No.
But do you ever feel like that length of experience is keeping Adam locked into some ideas, or do you think Adam's good at seeing his way around
No,
that?
Adam's very good at seeing his way around it. Yeah, but it is a good question. But he is one of those. He has a design mind. It might not show up in comps, but he's very creative. And there are developers that are just as creative as any painter or designer. It's their medium is code.
But it's interesting, right? Like we talk about design and as being an artistic thing, and software engineering as being more craftsmanship, which you could make an argument for being artistic, but usually is more like skilled and disciplined as opposed to free-flowing and artistic. But yeah, see, I had this conversation with somebody who straddles the line, an excellent engineer who also does side work and design, Brent, right? And I said the same thing to him, and he had a similar reaction. But then we have people who are very hard on the other side of the fence that are like, yeah, no, I have rules and logic, and this is the way it works, and I don't understand how you come up with these things.
Design being artistic is the thing that I'm kind of taking issue with, I think, because art is artistic, right? Yeah. And I feel like design, we're solving problems, and there's a lot of, first of all, there's a lot of discussion about whether designers ought to be able to code. And I think that there's a lot of merit to needing to understand the platform for which we're designing products. There's not really a lot of conversation that I'm hearing about developers needing to understand design. And I think that that's really important, so that we have an understanding of the fact that design actually is a discipline, and it is pretty rigorous, and the outcomes can and should be measured, and it isn't just subjective because I'm not creating it for myself, I'm creating it for users, for a client, right? And then all of that should be driven by some kind of decision, structure, logic, if I take some time on the weekend to paint something that really pleases me, I can't paint at all, actually, ironically. That's different. But I think understanding what design is and its role throughout the project and its goals, that I feel like, and I started to get at that a little bit in the beginning, there may be some tension around that, because being told, okay, just okay, you have like a day to put together something. You don't have to make it pretty, just kind of, or we just need some colors and some fonts. That fundamentally misses the point, right? And just as Jeremy can spend hours trying to get his code to be really elegant and efficient, that same amount of time, needs to be devoted to a design problem in order for that design problem to be elegant and efficient. And it isn't something that is just, I really like blue, and I think blue goes really well with orange. They're complements, and therefore
Those are our colors.
You
can come work for us.
there you go. Sold. No.
Do you happen to like the Whitney font? We're
love
big
that.
fans of the Whitney font.
Sure. Anyway, so.
We have dinosaurs.
It's true, they do have dinosaurs.
And I think the other side of it is there's an argument about whether or not coding is an art or a science, and it's really somewhere in between. I think there's part of the art is just the trade-offs, and the same applies to design, right? You have to make compromises all the time. You can't design something or engineer something that is perfect and will scale to 1 billion users, and you have to make those compromises.
It sounds like you all get along pretty well, which is great, but we need to find somebody that you don't get along with. So do your groups have a common enemy?
Common enemy.
The POs.
POs.
The POs. The
POs.
product owners.
Product
For sure.
See, I wanted to know how you feel about your product owners,
Well,
so that's a good
I'm
lead.
going to stop there. I mean,
We like our product
we
owners.
like our product owners, but
But if there's a
No,
common
no, they're not.
we really like you.
they're not sitting out in the.
But no, if there was a common enemy, it would
Yeah.
be them or, I don't know, somebody up the chain that
Right.
changes priorities.
Right. Yeah. The swooping poopers.
But yes,
I
the
guess
swoop and
would
poop.
be the-
Yep, the swoop and poop.
They can come from any group, can't they?
Yeah. Edit that out. Yeah. So I think they would give us the most amount of challenge because that for me is the client in a lot of ways. Yeah. I'm getting my business perspective from those guys, and at the same time, I'm also pulling away features that they might have dreamed up on the way to work. So it's a love-hate thing. But not hate. It's a. Do you know what I mean? There's certainly there can be friction there, especially as a UX architect. I'm the bad guy because I want to make things simple and always kind of test with scenarios and user testing, and I'm never quick. And sometimes they think I'm visual, so they come in and they say, I had this great idea. This is what the dashboard looks like. They hit the whiteboard, and can you make it? And I say, well, that's not exactly what I do for a living, but I'll set up all the usability testing, and I'll get back to you on that. And so that's where, if there's anybody that I piss off, it's probably the PO. No, and they're good for me. I have a good working relationship, I think.
Yeah, we have a good relationship with the POs. It's just they're the, I guess if we want anything changed, I've got 2 levels of people to convince, you and them.
Yes, that's true.
Michael Lopp actually gives a great talk on engineer, designer, and dictator as a kind of dynamic or a small nucleus of a team. And what's interesting is that dictator role. So we talk about the interaction between design and development and the collaboration and all of that. At some point, and I know a lot of you are managing teams or leading teams or agencies, somebody has to make the call, and somebody has to get rid of the bullshit, and somebody has to just kind of make sure that things are really driven forward. And if there's ambiguity, try to remove ambiguity. And if the team needs to be shielded, shield that team, but ultimately make the call. And I think our most successful projects and engagements are with partners, well, let's call them partners as opposed to necessarily just clients, where there's a person who makes the call, who gathers the information and it wants to be informed about the compromises on the development side, about the implications for the user, but ultimately just draws that line. And if that person does not exist, or if that person isn't sure and it's kind of like, then we're both like, and then nobody wins. Ultimately, you just have this project and you're not meeting the deadline, and somebody has to make the decision.
Yeah, we've actually had features roll out and then response to it on the company Facebook page Do you remember when we launched, were you there for the Wizard Flow? When people were calling for Jamie's job? They were like, whoever decided to make this change should be fired. Because the product owner was just like, I shortened the form, I made it fewer steps, I don't, you know. But they're the decision maker and get held accountable in the end.
At the end. They sweat a lot.
They do.
So you're saying is the users are the common enemy.
No.
We love our users.
They keep the lights on.
Yeah, exactly.
I think my biggest enemy is me from the past.
Like literal time traveling you from the
Yeah,
past?
and I am the greatest enemy of me from the future.
That's a common problem. I hate past Steve. He is a jerk.
Yeah. He was lazy. He was stupid. Yeah.
No Photoshop etiquette?
But it was fun. Past Steve was
I don't
fun.
even know about that. All right, so we've got a few minutes left. I'd love to open it up to some questions.
I'll mic it, but I don't get to mute it. Okay, actually, it's just a couple of comments, and it came from you, and I don't know your name.
Oh, it's
because-
Maggie, sorry.
Maggie, okay. The first thing that you said that really struck me is about the fact that, first of all, I'm a product owner, so let's just get that out on the table. And what you said about, we sometimes make some assumptions, right?
Right.
Because we don't always know, and that getting this pixel perfect design done and all the requirements all neatly signed up and all of our user stories perfect to you guys is it's not realistic. And so we go with this sort of minimum viable product. Let's get
Yeah.
something out. Let's throw spaghetti on the wall, see what sticks, get the feedback, and then iterate quickly. So that really stuck with me when you said that, sort of that MVP.
Yeah.
And then the other thing you said that really made a lot of sense to me as well is it's this idea of the early on collaboration and why we bother, because even my most introverted back-end developer, I make him sit in the room and understand the scenario. Why in the world are we even doing this? Like, we have identified a business problem we're trying to solve, and even though you're just coding it way down there in the deep end, understanding the scenario of what our user is trying to accomplish and the business objective will ultimately make a better product. And he may hem and haw, we call him Eeyore, but ultimately, secretly, he's whispered to me that he loves it. He really does. So I really think that both those points
Yeah.
were really resonant for me.
Thanks, guys. This is awesome. We have this conversation in our office almost daily, so this is really helpful. I want to talk about the last 10% of a project, because everyone knows like that is probably the hardest part of a project. You get like 90% done in like 3 weeks, and the last 10% takes 2 months. One of the things that we've done at our firm is we've opened up a lot of transparency. So designers have access to GitHub, and that's tied into HipChat, and everyone can see what everyone's doing, and everyone has access to the staging server. But it seems you always get to that 10%. And how do you guys work together as a team to get to that 20%
Right.
at the crunch time?
Yeah. At least my last large project for Constant Contact, I know that's coming up, and you're right, that last crunch is always a bear. So what my tact was to bring the team together almost on a bi-weekly basis, just to make sure everything's tight, and then go around to certain developers working on certain tasks and having one-on-ones almost daily, and just making sure the scrum, right? What are you working on? What's holding you back? Are there any blockers? How can I facilitate that? Because at this point, as a UX architect, a lot of my deliverables were already sent out. So I have a little freedom to kind of knit that together for folks, and I've found that it really works well if I take that on. And again, that's a little bit project managey, but at the same time, it's my baby as well as everyone else's, and I feel that really tight communication, and because I understand all the features that are being worked on at that moment, I have a great view of how to support each and every piece of development, push it up to the top, make sure that they're getting their designs And yeah, I found that's, for me, that's the only way to get through the 10%. Yeah.
That is pretty tough. As a consultancy, I mean, I only ever work on one project at a time, but our efforts often are staggered, even if there's interplay. And the toughest thing is, obviously, we are committed to the end product. And if I ever only stopped at Photoshop or whatever, there wouldn't be a whole lot of satisfaction from my job. I want things out, in the wild, alive, being used by people. So I definitely want to and care about supporting the development effort towards the very end and doing QA and verifying things like that. I'll say that it's difficult because sometimes I'm already on another project. And so we've had to really have a lot of conversations about what that looks like and how we structure our relationships with clients and how we structure our projects to allow some time. Context switching is really tough. So, and I won't BS and say that we figure this out. This is just an ongoing conversation. But the other thing that I wanted to say, since we're talking about finishing projects, sometimes at the end of the project there's like a big hurrah, and the only people that really get the credit are the people left standing, right? And it's like, all right, dev guys, yay, look, you did this, If you're managing people and you're managing an interdisciplinary team, remember to push that down all the way to the very beginning to all the people who are involved and who now succeeded because this thing shipped. And doing that, and when you do that regularly, it really incentivizes the designer who was maybe not really part of the project full time anymore to still check in, to still be available, to still make that commitment, because they know that at the end they're going to get the appreciation, recognition along with everybody else.
Yeah, I've definitely seen what you're talking about. We call it the long tail. I'm sure we didn't make that up, somebody else did. But and it becomes tough because a lot of that last 10% is the polish and the nitpicking and little features that are monotonous to pick off. And for us, I think it helps to prioritize.
It's also making it work in Internet Explorer.
Yes, yeah. You're right. Actually, the project you're talking about, the project he was talking about at the end, the very, very end where the shit hit the fan, was all Internet Explorer. Yeah. But having like a prioritized list and being able to see the light at the end of the tunnel and not we have 100 little tiny bugs left to do, but we're going to get these 10, 15 things that are absolutely needed for launch and just getting it done. And then that's where you need the PO to say, these are my top 10 you absolutely cannot ship without. Right. Yeah. Without a priority, it's just daunting.
Yeah. No, that's true.
Do you ever bring development resources in earlier, even while you're still preparing concepts, to have more interactive mock-ups, to validate things further down the line? Have you experimented with workflows that you're kind of getting in each other's stuff a little sooner in the process, or maybe thinking of a front-end developer that would be most effective in that role?
For me, I'll just go back to how I started it. Yeah, if I can get them from day one, I just really want them to be there. It feels good to share this in a lot of ways. I won't have them around for every piece and part of the ThinkIt. Again, they're busy folks, and I have to respect that. But at the same time, I get all that information, and they get to pollinate that idea amongst all the other developers. So it's kind of a PR piece too, right? So I'm being a little clever about it. If I let the top dog understand the project, and we can have a conversation on it, he can go ahead and spread that news throughout, more likely than not, the folks that will be working on it.
You're doing viral marketing?
Yeah, it's a little bit of viral marketing.
Guerrilla campaigns?
Yeah, a little, yeah. So, yeah.
But I'm also thinking of actually creating the comps, and like you mentioned Photoshop deliverables or fireworks or something.
Oh, right,
and then you implement it. I wonder about developing something that is more interactive to present the ideas, even for user testing.
Absolutely. So I'm an Axure developer. So I produce all prototypes up to the point where, they're sim, but up to the point where it's helpful. I know that if I show Adam, he'll be able to kind of pressure test that and rip it apart. So yeah, early prototyping is something I enjoy doing, and flat user flows. So wireframes, nothing designer or visual, but something just to get the flows down so I can have a more in-depth conversation with Adam the second time around. But I do believe in the first time we actually start digging into we have a project, that's still a good time to bring some senior guys in. So again, they can spread, give me a couple initial ideas, I come back to them with interactive prototypes. That's how I handle it.
The same thing that happens to designers at the end, where they have to participate, and happens to developers in the beginning, where they ought to be involved and make time to be involved, even if, because sometimes projects are staggered, they might be hardcore focused on something else, but it's still important. And we do prototype quite a bit, and there are lots of codeless prototyping options out there. Occasionally we have to resort to other means. Occasionally it's, here's this concept, is it going to be impossible down the road? So feasibility discussions and brainstorming ways around perhaps something that's too time consuming to implement and conceptualize something else. But we do prototype and we actually do user testing with prototypes before we get to development. And those prototypes come in different forms. I personally use InVision a lot. It's, for those of you who are familiar, a pretty powerful tool, and lots of simulation that's possible in there, including both on mobile and desktop platforms. If you want to add something to that early involvement.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest values that developers can provide earlier on is just feasibility. And that even happens before design sometimes in early meetings with clients when we're kind of in the business development phase. Since we're not a product company, we're a services company. So we'll talk to a client and they'll have an idea, and we'll kind of vet the feasibility within, they have a budget constraint typically. So given, a $50,000 or $100,000 or $500,000 budget, what can you actually accomplish? And what are the skills that we have? And I'm pretty confident that we can build pretty much anything with the team that we have. It's just a matter of time and money. So that happens usually pretty early on, but then sometimes those shake out during early design phases. So seeing wireframes early on really helps us. Seeing those prototypes early on helps us. So however you want to do the communication is all that really matters.
We have time for one more.
So I know the talk is designer developer therapy, but what is your experience or opinion on designers or developers who kind of cross that line, like anyone who's designs but can also code to a degree, or any thoughts on that?
Unicorns.
Purple ones.
Not on t-shirts though, not on t-shirts. No, I think it's awesome, and at the most basic level, having an understanding for the platform for which we're designing is important. Whether that actually translates to code, I mean, I write HTML and CSS, and I know our other designer does as well. Now, in production, or I don't write production code ever, that's a unique situation that we've solved given the number of kind of development resources that we have versus number of design resources we have. So it's just like division of labor that makes sense for our team. I think it's often a great asset for a designer to be able to write code because you can deliver the handoff points or the prototypes that you create can be more dynamic, and basically the more tools you have at your disposal, the better. I mean, that kind of goes without saying. So I definitely try to, what's the word I'm looking for, grow my skill set. Sometimes that's challenging because if you spend 90% of your time doing A, you're going to get really good at doing A. And so if you really want to do B, you better carve out some time for that as well. But I think it's only a plus if you can code as well.
Yeah, I actually poached a guy from our UX department a while back because he showed some engineering skills and conversations that we had. And I brought him over, and I think he was probably the most productive guy we had. He moved on to a startup where he was like the lead front-end person, so a great opportunity for him. But for a while he was there, he was, I think, the most effective member of the team because he could do both. He was a good engineer, and he had been a really good designer. So it alleviated some pressure on our team to be able to get at UX resources. But we've scaled out UX since then. It's less of a problem now. But the couple that I've met, I'm happy to have them on the engineering team. I haven't seen it the other way, though. I've seen engineers that had done design. I haven't seen someone in the UX department that has been really strong engineering. You know, like that stays there. Right. Not saying it can't happen. I just haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, and I think so I do both, and I found in my life to separate them. Because it really, I have a strong passion for both, but you know, in a large company and product, facing type company, you're not asked to do both, and sometimes that can be problematic. So I'll go against it a little bit by saying I have to kind of hold myself back because I'm being asked to produce something very specific without a design look at it and without an engineering look at it. So I'm really right in the middle right now. And so that tension, after the years kind of go by, has been less and less. And I know how to separate my skill sets. But again, for a smaller company, I always found that I was an art director for an interactive firm here in Boston. And they used me for everything. You know, it was great. You know, they called me the Swiss Army knife, and they could pull me out, and I could just get it all done. Again, with bigger clients, when I was consultant for many years, I found myself having to pick. So I think it's different depending on the size of the company, how much you're let to kind of play with all these great toys.
It's a little bit of a generalization versus specialization, and I guess it just. One thing I would look for or watch out for if I started to write code is to make sure that my coding, which is not as strongly developed a skill as my design, is not driving my design decisions. Because this is all I can do, and therefore, suddenly I'm making all these different compromises.
You're limited by what you know how to implement.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your questions. Thank you to our panelists.